Speed. What does it take to fly faster than sound?
They were very violent. It makes the airplane buck around and bang your head around.
To reach 300 miles per hour in just a few seconds. Speed. How fast is the fastest gun in the West? And what does it take to be the fastest horse on the track? It's all about speed. More than 30 years ago, a revolutionary aircraft took off from a top-secret airfield somewhere in the Nevada desert. Back then, the SR-71 Blackbird was the fastest jet airplane in the world. It still is. Speed. What does it take to fly faster than any other?
All of our increases in speed of travel have been done in the atmosphere. Even getting to orbit, you have to go through the atmosphere. Now, the atmosphere objects to that. The atmosphere is a fairly dense, sticky stuff, and it objects to things going fast through it.
And the objections increase with speed. In the 1940s, as experimental aircraft approached the speed of sound, they encountered an invisible barrier in the sky. It tore the wings off and killed pilots. They called it the sound barrier. As a plane pushes through the air, it causes minute pressure disturbances to radiate away, like the ripples on a pond. At low speeds, they outrun the plane. But when it accelerates to Mach 1, the speed of sound, the ripples pile up to form a large standing wave, a dangerous zone of high drag and pressure. A barrier to speed that stymied engineers and pilots alike.
Well, the sound barrier was one that we thought we could get through because we knew that bullets traveled at supersonic speeds and artillery shells.
So we knew things could go faster. Shooting a muzzle velocity on a 30-06 rifle bullet, that thing comes out of there rotating and is stabilized by the rotation, and it goes supersonic. So we knew it would be possible if you could get enough thrust and if you could reduce the drag.
In 1948, a tiny rocket plane specifically designed to break the sound barrier was rolled out onto a remote airfield in the high California desert, the Bell X-1. The hydrogen and oxygen fuel in her 4 rocket engines gave her 6,000 pounds of thrust. With fuel for just a 2.5-minute burn, the X-1 was carried aloft, strapped to the belly of a B-47. Chuck Yeager, the aircraft's pilot, would be flying into the unknown. Could the X-1 survive the turbulent air as it approached the sound barrier? And what would happen once the barrier was penetrated? Entering a danger zone of speed at Mach 0.96, Yeager encounters buffeting. But trusting his tiny aircraft, he presses on toward Mach 1. At Mach 0.98, the X-1 shakes violently. At 10:33 local time, 2 explosions crack across the desert. The X-1 had caught up with its own sound, sending a giant pressure wave crashing to Earth, the first sonic booms in the history of flight. The X-1 made aviation history. It also revealed the truth about the sound barrier. In fact, there was no definitive barrier at all. Unstable shock waves caused turbulence and drag in a zone of speed from about Mach 0.8 to Mach 1.2. At higher speeds, the shock waves stabilized and Yeager's flight once again became smooth and predictable. But what do shock waves actually look like? At Edwards Air Force Base, a NASA team sets out to take a picture of a shockwave actually forming on a supersonic aircraft flying high overhead. To make the image, an extremely powerful light source is needed, so they point their camera directly at the sun, hoping to capture pressure waves radiating from the aircraft as it penetrates the sound barrier.
Looks good.
A computer compensates for the Earth's rotation to keep the lens lined up with the sun. 6 miles high, the test aircraft now attempts to fly a precise course between the camera and the sun.
Initiate camera run now.
The airplane must pass through a target zone that is only 100 feet wide.
Steady on course.
Even with the best navigational equipment, it is a difficult task. This is one of only 2 photographs ever taken that shows a shockwave actually forming on an aircraft. It was taken by Ed Herring and the NASA team.
As we're looking at the sun, the aircraft flew by the sun, and we're looking at the light of the sun being refracted through the density changes of the shock waves. So we're able to see what the shock waves look like.
An aircraft's shockwave is like the wake of a boat. As speeds increase, the wake bends backward. To reduce drag, a supersonic aircraft must always fly within its wake. So as the planes went faster, they became long and slim, and wings were swept back. By 1958, only 10 years after Yeager's flight, military fighters were traveling twice the speed of sound. In that same year, a radical new aircraft was conceived. A spy plane, created in absolute secrecy to probe the enemy's defenses.
The experience with this program is it started out so ultra secret, you couldn't even tell your wife what you were doing or where you're going or when you'd get home.
Imagine an aircraft that could fly Mach 3, faster than a rifle bullet, travel further than any other military craft, cruise serenely at altitudes never before attempted. Such a plane would capture the high ground over alien nations and look down on them with impunity. But to achieve this dream, Blackbird's designers would have to overcome the objections of the atmosphere. First, the heat. At Mach 3, Blackbird would enter what engineers call the thermal thicket, a zone of speed where temperatures soar, 1100 degrees Fahrenheit at the exhaust, 800 at the nose. In extended flight, she would bake for hours at temperatures that would melt a traditional aluminum skin. To combat the heat, the plane's designers would use a rare and unproved alloy, titanium. Titanium could endure the heat, but was it strong enough to survive the stress of supersonic flight? To find out, they baked and stressed the plane in a giant oven at extreme temperatures. The test was reassuring, but how would titanium perform under the actual stress of flight? Test pilot Bob Gilliland.
The main concern, at least initially, was that this airplane had been built in a brand new metal. We didn't know exactly how strong it'd be. The designers had not done something right. The tail could come off, or something could break and experience a cataclysmic structural failure. So we were worried about that. At least I was, and I think everybody else was too.
As Gilliland accelerated past Mach 2, friction from the air baked Blackbird's skin. In her wake, the air boiled for 200 yards.
Everything's so hot. I remember I used to be able to put my hand up with a gloved hand with multiple layers and rubberized, and I could feel the heat coming in just from the heat of the glass on my hand up there, and so you wouldn't want to touch it.
On missions of 5 hours or more, Blackbird was subjected to what designers call a heat soak. The hot metal expanded, causing her fuselage to grow as much as a foot in length. But there was another problem. To go faster than Mach 3, Blackbird would drag a huge shockwave. her jet engines would need the power of 45 diesel locomotives. And here, the designers took another risk. They built a revolutionary new engine that used an ingenious spike to harness the power of shock waves. Aerodynamicist Dick Cantrell.
We reached Mach 3.2 at cruise, the shock wave forming on this tip of the inlet four-body spike grows and lays right here on the inlet lip at the face of the inlet, so that all of the air behind that shock wave, all of it goes into the inlet for maximum efficiency.
Inside the engine, the shock wave is bounced between the spike and the inlet wall. Air passing through the successive shock waves slows down, creating tremendous pressure behind the spike, over 40 times that of the outside atmosphere. That pressure actually drives Blackbird forward, providing 80% of the engine's power. As test flights continued, Blackbird ventured into new realms of speed. Mach 2, Mach 2.2, Mach 2.4. Suddenly, at about Mach 2.6, she showed her dark side.
Pilots have described it as something like a train wreck. It's kind of a wild ride up there for the first few seconds.
They were very violent, even under optimum conditions. They were very violent, and it would, when you're flying sideways, it makes the airplane buck around and bang your head around.
It was a sudden loss of thrust in one of Blackbird's engines that caused it to buck in the sky. The engine was too efficient, building up so much pressure that it blew the shock waves right out the inlet. The solution was a complex series of channels to vent the pressure away from the inlet and out the back of the engine. Only 17 years after Chuck Yeager had first encountered shock waves as he flew 700 miles per hour, Blackbird had harnessed the energy in them to fly 3 times as fast. The SR-71 flew into combat on missions so secret they are classified even today, over Vietnam, North Korea, some say even China and the Soviet Union. Even from the most dangerous assignments, Blackbird always returned.
I know I've heard that they've shot at it with the very latest Russian stuff over 4,000 times, and they've never gotten a hit. That speaks for itself.
Today, Blackbird still holds flying records for distance, altitude, and speed. With the advent of spy satellites and the end of the Cold War, no one has needed to better them. Of the 30 built, only 4 are still flying, and they are likely to remain the fastest military aircraft for a very long time.